So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on what's going to be, looks like a gray day in Columbus, Ohio. We are here to talk about a very important topic. In fact, we sent out a separate piece of correspondence around trying to motivate folks to listen to this webinar because I think it's so important. And I'm super excited to have Alicia Shaw here, a lawyer who I'll let her introduce herself and her background and talk about some labor issues and some employee relationship issues, which I think are really critical and also difficult to navigate in this crazy environment that we have right now. And so, as entrepreneurs, we our most important and most valuable asset is our business. And for most of us, our most valuable asset in the business is our employees, and the culture and your relationship with the employees matter a ton. And this really crazy time we live in that seems to continue to be crazy, and for a while, we need to really understand some legal implications with our employees. So anyway, here we are with Alicia, and why don't you give us some background on what you do and how you do it and how you got there?
Well, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I am an attorney with Carlile Patchen Murphy, and we are a full service law firm. Our main office is in Grandview, and we have an office in Dublin, Ohio. I am in the employment group, and I do most of our firm's employment law. So I've been dealing with COVID nonstop for the past year, and I don't say I'm an expert. It changes all the time, but it's certainly been an interesting year.
And you mentioned, we talked on Monday, that you've really enjoyed it because
Yes.
You've been able to solve problems for people.
Well, I would say that I've been able to touch base with a lot of clients that, I hadn't talked with over the years. They're probably glad they don't need to talk with their lawyer every day. And it's really been a good way to educate clients, and it's fun to, work with people and get them through some of these really serious challenges, navigating what's going on. And most importantly, like you said, how you communicate with your employees and how you treat employees at this time, it is just so critical. So it's been really fun working with my clients doing that.
So how did you become a lawyer and then get this type of law? What happened?
So I was a history major.
All right. Okay. All right.
You know what? I always thought I wanted to work in the Foreign Service. And then I studied abroad and I decided, you know what? I really don't think I want to work in the Foreign Service. So what can I do? And I had a wonderful internship opportunity when I was in college, and that's how I got into law school. My parents are not lawyers, so I'm kind of the first lawyer in the family. And then I found my way to Carlile through a firm merger. I used to work for a smaller firm. We merged with Carlile about 6 years ago, and it's been great.
So before we get to the meat of the topic, I have to ask, where did you study abroad?
Prague.
Okay.
And it was back in the late 90s. So It was pretty rustic.
I'm going to go with exciting.
It was exciting, but a bit rustic.
Good. Well, again, thanks for having us, or thanks for being here, and let's talk about it. So what is, walk me through what has changed legally at a high level from a year ago as a result of COVID?
In terms of employment-related matters, and actually, I should say this first before we start talking. I need to give my legal disclaimer.
Do it.
I am a practicing attorney. I'm licensed in the state of Ohio, but what I'm providing today is not legal advice. No one should construe it as legal advice. It is for information purposes only. So any questions that you give to me, I will assume that they are hypotheticals and answer them that way.
And the flip side of that is I'm not a lawyer, but I'm totally giving legal advice today. So if you guys want to get legal advice, whatever I say is legally accurate and relevant at this point in time. So
back to your question. It's changed drastically. We have new laws that apply now. we have the paid sick leave, the paid family leave, and there's all kinds of nuance with those that we can get into as another round of extensions were passed this month. And just in terms of, travel or going from an office environment for many of my clients, especially, all of my non-manufacturing clients, they had to take employees out of the office for at least some time. Getting people back into the office is now what a lot of my clients are working through. But making the transition to remote work, at first it was, we can't do this. Well, now we have to. How do we do this in a way that, we're making sure we're paying people properly? We're making sure that our data is secure. Giving someone access to your company's server on their home laptop is not ideal unless you have the correct precautions taken. And then now we're getting into employee privacy issues with the vaccines, and an employer is able to, monitor certain health factors that, they've never had to before. So, it's changed drastically.
So you used a couple of words there. You said they can monitor, they never had to. So they have to monitor them, or they can monitor them?
So it depends. It depends. To be in compliance with state of Ohio, responsible restart guidelines and CDC guidelines, and now OSHA is really ramping up its guidelines. It was kind of silent during the past year, and now we know that they're going to be coming out with a lot more enforcement. So employers really need to be cognizant that they probably do need to at least screen employees who are coming into the office for the time being in terms of, are they having a fever? Are they having symptoms?
Got it.
And
what happens if they don't?
If they don't, the risk is that you would be exposing the office to someone who's sick.
Well, I understand that part of it, but what if they don't do it and then somebody comes in who is sick, in fact?
So I will use real life examples. I've had clients that have had to shut down their offices for 2 weeks at a time because they've had someone in the office, unbeknownst to them, who had spread it around. They weren't practicing social distancing, they weren't wearing masks, for whatever reason.
And who shut them down?
They needed to the local health department, when you have a COVID positive person in the office, you work with the local health department in Ohio anyway. And that's what the local health department required.
Got it.
So the risk in a sense is, and this is this whole privacy issue, a lot of employers don't think it's their responsibility or don't want to do that, which is understandable. The risk is that you are exposing employees potentially to sick individuals, and then you may have OSHA issues.
Okay.
If the state comes in and, the Department of Health comes in and says, well, you're not following any of the state's guidelines, you may have those kinds of issues.
Have you actually seen any enforcement from OSHA on this matter?
I have not had a client. However, with the administration change, OSHA has changed drastically and is ramping up efforts. And so we are now seeing cases come through, investigations, and I think that's going to be more prevalent.
Got it. So let's go back to something that you said earlier, and thankfully I'm taking notes so I don't forget, because I'm old enough to forget in 2 minutes. Paying people properly. So we sent people home and to make sure we're paying them properly. What does that mean exactly?
So whenever you have someone who's working remotely, if they are not an exempt employee, meaning exempt from overtime, paid on a salary basis, all that fun stuff, you need to have accurate records of the time that they've been working. So you can say, employee, clock in, clock out, tell me when you're working. Well, maybe that person only took a 15-minute lunch break that day, but they said, oh, I'm supposed to take a half an hour and clock out. So I'm just going to clock out, but I actually worked through. So you have a lot of potential for inaccurate timekeeping records. Same thing, before this, when people would have email on their cell phones, it would be the same thing. Do you have a non-exempt person who's checking their email at night? Is that compensable time? Likely it is. So really it's on the employer to say, first, you need to have accurate time records. We expect that you are, clocking in, clocking out appropriately. and that you don't have actual knowledge that they are not accurate time records. Meaning if you get
Got
an
it.
email from someone at midnight who's not supposed to be working at midnight,
Got it.
then you know.
So the expectation as employers that we have to ensure we have accurate time. And the flip side I was thinking about was, I know when we had sent everybody home, one of the challenges that they had and they, complained about was that it's hard because, all of a sudden their kid interrupts them or, UPS is at the door. And so technically they're supposed to clock out during that.
Well, you know what? Actually, an employer is to pay an individual unless their breaks are 20 minutes or more. So if you're talking about a non-exempt person,
non-exempt,
then if they're just running to answer the door, they shouldn't clock out.
Got it.
As long as that didn't take 20 or more minutes.
Okay, got it.
So you're not going to have a problem on the overpayment side. It's the
underpayment. Okay, so I assume those rules still exist today. In other words, so they're, and do you see them changing in any way as a result of the responsible restart or any additional legislation or?
No, there have been no changes other than, in terms of wage and hour law changes, there was a lot of scuttlebutt about a $15 an hour minimum wage federally, which I had some clients getting very nervous about. I was not surprised that did not happen. But I do think that there may be some wage changes in terms of, what is the minimum wage? We might get a bump. In Ohio, we're already ahead of the federal level. So, and ours has increased over the past few years. But in terms of how you compensate, how you do, your record keeping, I don't see any changes there.
Okay. So let's talk about responsible restart. Where are we with that today, and how fluid is it, and how's it going to evolve in your opinion?
So the governor earlier this month gave us some indications of when he would take away the mandatory health restrictions in terms of, masks in public and all that fun stuff. So the responsible restart, they're all guidelines that are, expected. Businesses that fall into the certain categories are expected to follow these guidelines as they reopen. Those are still all effective right now. The only changes that have come since the vaccinations have come out are quarantine related issues for people who have been fully vaccinated. So that has changed.
And how's it changed?
So currently, the CDC and then the state of Ohio adopted it as well. If an individual is 2 weeks past their last vaccination, or if they receive the Johnson & Johnson just 2 weeks past that date, they do not have to quarantine from the workplace based on a close contact with a COVID positive person. Prior to that, if you were in close contact with someone who tested positive for COVID, you needed to quarantine from the workplace. And that was really a struggle. For people who could work from home, easier to do. For people who can't, very difficult.
And so is the definition of close contact going to change?
It has already.
Okay.
So it changed in December. Right now, I don't think that's going to change, although with the school reopening, you have the CDC saying that 3 feet for kids is okay if they're masked. But currently, right now, close contact is being within 6 feet of an individual for 15 or more minutes, whether or not you're masked. And that 15-minute time period does not have to be consecutive. That's over a 24-hour period. So you could have 2 different work days implicated. And that has to take place within 48 hours of a COVID positive test or symptoms beginning.
Okay, so let me get this straight. If somebody tests positive for COVID, and if I spend 15 minutes with them in any way, so 15 one-minute episodes over the course of 24 hours, that's defined as close contact today.
Yes, within 48 hours.
48 hours.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes. So if you tested positive tomorrow, I would probably be in your close contact list. But anyway, yes.
I don't intend to test positive tomorrow.
Neither do I.
Okay. And so what's the next step for the definition of close contact in your opinion, or is there one?
It will be interesting to see how the school mandate changes, whether or not they adopt that for a non-school situation. I don't know the answer to that. I think what we're hoping is that there will be enough vaccination that it won't matter, because the majority of people will not have to do that anyway.
Yeah, because if you're vaccinated, you're exempt from it. Okay.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. Good. Okay. So what additional, when we talked last about this, there's some changes that are still coming regarding.
So changes in the sense of we've had new legislation in terms of the paid sick leave.
Okay.
We haven't had any changes since early March with the vaccine, changing the close contact. But in terms of paid sick leave, we have the emergency paid sick leave. We have the expanded family medical leave. That was all part of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act.
Mm-hmm.
That leave, which was mandatory for certain employers in 2020, was extended through 2020, March 31st, today, on a voluntary basis. It has been extended again on a voluntary basis until September 30th. So right now, you have the question, am I as an employer, if I'm eligible, if I have less than 500 employees, do I want to continue offering that leave? And that leave does come with tax credits. So, you may look at your workforce and say, the majority of us have been vaccinated and we're probably going to be fine. And so I'm not going to worry about it. Or you may look at your workforce and say, you know what? I have a lot of, employees that are not going to get the vaccine for whatever reason. It's hard to socially distance in our office. So I probably should offer that leave, because that way when they're off sick, they can get compensation and the employer doesn't pay for it ultimately.
Right. Talk to me about the ability to require your employees to get vaccinated.
Oh my gosh, yes, that is the question.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's one that I've had from my clients more than I would have thought. The answer is yes, you can as a private employer. Yes, you can. There are a lot of exceptions that have to be taken into account. So if you have an employee who, requests an accommodation because they can't obtain the vaccine due to a disabling condition, you have to go through your ADA analysis. And likely not, they're not going to be able to get the vaccine. So it's, what do we do then? Do we have to exclude them from the office? Is there a way to accommodate them else, maybe segregate them in an enclosed space?
So what I'm kind of hearing you say, there's no recipe that exists for this necessarily. So an employee, so if you require all your employees to get the vaccine and one cannot, we'll start with cannot, okay? There's no recipe at this point in time to say, here's how we handle this person.
No.
Right.
It is a very much fact-specific, analysis.
And what about the employee who will not get the vaccine?
So that's a very different situation. So you have somebody who either, because of a disabling condition or because of a religious reason says, I cannot get the vaccine.
Right.
Those are the two issues that you really have to work with as an employer.
Right.
Now, if someone just comes to you and says if you're going to require it and someone says, I'm not getting it and I just don't want it, then yes, you can take disciplinary action, exclude them from the workplace, perhaps termination. I think for a lot of clients, that's really going to be difficult, especially in certain areas of the state where you might have people who are much more reluctant to get the vaccine. And are they going to terminate 30% of their workforce? Probably not.
Right.
So it's something to think about. I will tell you, I do not typically recommend that. I think you really have to have an extenuating circumstance to require it.
You do not recommend employers require their employees to get the vaccine. And the reason why is because it's too difficult to administer?
For all of those reasons, if you have somebody that the minute somebody says, I have this condition, you're opening up this further legal analysis and potential exposure that you don't need to do, unless you are an employer with a very specific risk. For example, frankly, one of the few types of employers I think that are doing this are senior, nursing homes, employees who work there.
Got it. Yeah, I'm thinking about a few of our clients who are manufacturing businesses that, the step one is dependent on step two, is dependent on step three. And so the people who choose not to be available because they're concerned about getting COVID at this point in time, but are also choosing not to get the vaccine for whatever reason. I was thinking about those folks that, they can't work remotely. They have to be physically at a location but the senior or the nursing home makes sense too. Let's go back to the religious issue. So a person cites that their religion prohibits vaccination. What proof do they need to present?
It is, an employer is going down probably a potentially dangerous road asking for proof. I think in those situations, you just say, okay. I mean, unless there was some very extenuating circumstance, which makes you think that this is a made up belief. This isn't a sincerely held religious belief. That is what the standard is.
Yep.
What does that mean? I don't think any employer wants to litigate that issue.
Got it. Okay. So, the employee, if I'm an employer and I choose not to require vaccination, but I still have people refusing to work because of they're concerned about getting COVID, what can I do about that?
So when you say refusing to work, I assume you mean refusing to come back to the work's.
Refusing to come back to the workplace.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
So
and again, I'm going back to that manufacturing situation.
Absolutely. So, if they're uncomfortable in the workplace, that's a little different analysis than my doctor says I'm at high risk and I should not be at the workplace.
Understand that.
If you have someone who's just, I'm uncomfortable, I don't want to come back.
Yeah.
That's not protected. Just being uncomfortable, at first, nobody's comfortable coming back.
Right.
And there's anxiety around it. And I think that one of the things that will continue from COVID are mental health challenges for employees that employers are going to have to deal with over the next few years. So in that sense, if someone just says, I don't want to come to the office, and you say you need to come into the office to do your job, they will need to find another job.
Got it.
If they say that for a protected reason, then you start through your analysis.
Yeah, right. Okay, so when's this all end?
Well,
or maybe wrong question. Does it ever end?
I think that there are going to be certain things that follow us from COVID, hopefully not COVID itself. But like I said, I think mental health, it was already an issue that a lot of my clients were facing with employees pre-COVID.
Yeah.
I think one of the most challenging things as an employer, especially a smaller employer, you only have to have 50 employees to be FMLA compliant. And when you have someone who legitimately has a condition, a mental health condition, they may need to take intermittent leave. Those are very complex issues. And those were on the uptick before COVID.
So use the word legitimately.
Well, and I hate to,
I mean, but seriously, it's.
And that's always the struggle. I find that, the way that I practice, you always have to assume it's a legitimate request, even though sometimes, I will have someone say this, they just don't want to come to work.
Right.
And so it is a struggle because you as the person counseling an employer, I understand it is difficult trying to make some of these accommodations, but sometimes that's what needs to happen.
Right.
And so, I always say, try not to judge just yet.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, in my experience of talking to clients, there's some generational issues too, because, what a 70-year-old's view of mental health is versus a 50-year-old's view of mental health versus a 30-year-old view of mental health are different.
Absolutely. And not only that, remote work requests were also on the rise, and so many clients, that's not something that we do. Well, now That's something we've done.
Yeah.
And so that's gonna stay with us.
Yeah. Yeah. So on a permanent basis, permanent, we'll use that word loosely, because who knows what's permanent anymore in this world. It's hard to, gravity is permanent and good chicken wings are permanent. Taxes are probably permanent as well. Death is permanent. But anyway, my great sense of humor is permanent. So what I'm hearing you say that permanently we're going to have to be attentive more than ever to employees' health. And permanently, we're going to have to be accommodative to work from home environments if the company, if the job allows for it. So again, going back to, if you're in a medical office, probably not going to work. Nursing home, probably not going to work. Manufacturing facility, not going to work. But a professional service firm, different topic.
Yes, and I think that it is going to be something that, as a result of COVID, I remember last summer when we were reading The Death of the Office. That's not going to happen. I mean, that's not going to happen. It's going to change, but that's not going to happen. But I do think what we're going to see is a lot more hybrid work from home situations that, frankly, with the younger generation coming up that appreciates working from home, that may be very productive working from home. They're tech savvy, I'm using generalities, but I think that's going to be more and more a recruiting tool for employers. But you're right, there are jobs that are never going to be able to be accomplished from home. To the extent that you have, you're in a position that you can, and your employer's flexible, I think that's going to be a real draw and a way for employers to keep talent.
So what other changes do you see that's going to linger past COVID besides those two issues?
I think employee privacy is something that's going to be debated a lot, at least in the next couple of years, in terms of, we have this vaccine. I think this has opened up a discussion more in terms of, what can an employer require of an employee. So I think that'll be interesting. I think some industries that are really going to benefit from all of this work at home are the IT security industry, because you have to have a secure workforce from home. And from what I've heard from, people out in that area, that is becoming extremely difficult.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, it's scary actually. I was on a call yesterday that the IT security issue is really difficult. And in fact, these cameras are the biggest part of the problem because they're easily hacked. And there's really, right now, there's not hardware or software out there to really make that hack proof like a firewall would. And so it is an interesting, we haven't, seen the tip of the iceberg with that yet, I think, unfortunately.
I agree.
So is there other things that are?
Well, I was going to add, I do think that we are going to see, Ohio doesn't have any requirements, and only an FMLA leave is all unpaid. But I do think that someday we may see some paid sick leave, paid family leave. Certain states have already offered it. That's increasing. I would be surprised if we don't at some point as well.
And it's related to COVID or inspired by COVID?
I think inspired by COVID, because that was really the first time that there was a national, crisis that really put focus on these people are going to be sent home because they're ill through no fault of their own, and they do not have anything to support their income.
So what do we do about, so we've dealt with the flu for years, right? People get the flu, they get sick, and some people come in and hack and cough and sneeze, and some people don't. So is this changing our overall duty to employees all around so COVID's one thing, it's easy-ish to identify what COVID is, but if somebody's just sick, do we now have an obligation to send them home?
I don't think that it extends beyond the COVID situation right now. In my mind, it's of course always good to have that policy.
Sure.
If you're going to spread disease, I do think that, a lot of employees and people in general will be more cautious, at least for the next few years, in terms of, maybe if they're not feeling well, they wear a facial covering or they stay away from people. I mean, you would have some people drag themselves into the office just on death's door.
Right.
those people should be sent home.
Yeah.
You know, are you creating an unsafe environment if you don't send them home? I don't necessarily think so.
And you don't think that the current situation will be a catalyst to evolve to a legal dynamic around, we have a duty to send people home who are ill regardless of illness?
That is a very good question. I've never really thought about that in terms of how will this impact us in the future. Well, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if almost peer pressure, you know, right now, if somebody coughs near you.
Yeah, sure,
You know,
right.
I think that's.
God forbid a sneeze.
I know. So I think that will stay around with us for a bit. In terms of, you know, you have to look at what is an imminent danger, what's a threat to the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, your coughs and colds and bronchitis, that's not.
Right.
So I'm hesitant to say that you know, having somebody, you know, past COVID, when we're done with this, who has a fever, you know, employers aren't going to be able to monitor fevers after this.
Okay. So I know from our own perspective, like I think we're going to be permanent, maybe not the right word, but for a long time socially distant, because, you know, I don't want people getting sick, any type of illness, right? And we can easily send people home for a day or two at a time. And so I see us having a long-term change as a result of this. So walk me through, you know, as a small employer, what changes to my handbook do I need to make today to reflect, you know, to modernize, you know, our relationship with employees from a legal perspective? What do we need to do or not do?
That is a good question. I think, you know, there are a few things that are coming out, and whether it's COVID related or some of the social issues that have happened over the past year. I have, you know, the handbooks that I look at, the questions that I'm getting are, first of all, the personal electronic devices. You know, we have to have good policies on that. You have to, if employees can access email from their phone or they're using their tablet to get things from your server, you have to know what's going on, and your policies have to be applicable to those.
So give me an example. What does my policy need to say?
Well, typically, you know, it differs if you are providing, as the employer, the laptop or something like that. That's much more clear cut.
Yep.
It gets a little gray in terms of employee privacy when you have somebody who owns the device and they are using it for work, and you may be requiring them to use it for work. You know, it's kind of a scale of how your rights to that item and that information if you don't own the device. So if you don't have policies in place for that, you could be exposing yourself to a rogue employee with little ways and no access to their device to get your information back. So that's really the conversation that you have to have with an IT professional. Yep. And then we incorporate those, whatever the IT professional recommends and that the employer is doing, then we incorporate that into the policy. So
this is just, it's modernization of your handbook that's newer, but really not COVID related. It just inspired because people started going home.
Exactly. Yeah. It's become much more pressing, I would say. The other issue are the social media policies. So many people on social media and just without being aware of who's watching and who knows what they're saying.
Everybody's watching.
Everybody's watching.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And in terms of, you know, other policies, I do think I see my clients that are trying to expand their benefits, and it's not easy, especially if they're, you know, looking at additional PTO. But I do think that those are the conversations that I've been having the most.
Got it. So is there anything from a compliance perspective we should add or change to our handbooks as a result of COVID?
You know, what I would say is, of course, you should have a COVID related policy for your workplace in terms of, you know, what the expectations are. You know, if you have a household member who has been diagnosed, you need to tell us and then go get tested.
You say, of course, like it's obvious, but I'm not so sure it's actually obvious.
You're absolutely right. And
Yeah.
I say that only because this is what I've
Do every
lived
day.
and breathed
Sure, right,
for the past month or year.
How many people actually change their handbook to reflect that in your experience?
Well, what I don't recommend is changing the handbook. So I think that can set outside because we are not going to need this forever. And frankly,
Got it.
for example, I have drafted our firm's COVID policy. It has changed probably 5 times based on new information, based on new guidelines. And so it is a very fluid policy, and that's what is going to serve an employer best.
So it changes, you have to legally make the change, and then you have to enforce it. And in your experience, how many percentage-wise are your clients enforcing it consistently, and like how hard is that to do?
Enforcing a COVID policy, I would say, so it's really interesting. I think most of my clients really want to, they want to do what's expected and what's required. I think it's challenging for every workplace. You'll see some workplaces where, I'll hear about someone going into a store somewhere and nobody's wearing masks and so, yeah, you do have some, employers that don't take it as seriously as others. But in my experience, at least when they're coming to me to ask those questions, they do care about complying.
Got it. Okay. All right. So I meant to say, and I forgot to, that if you have questions, post them to our chat. And I see we do have a question, and when I actually can't see it until I put my glasses on. But and so the question I have here is, are there legal risks of offering incentives, monetary bonus, or paid time off for those staff choosing to get the vaccine?
That is a good question because frankly, and that kind of gets back to our vaccine talk, my advice is usually to encourage and to make it easily accessible, but not to require. So I do have a lot of clients who, what can I give people? They really feel strongly about it. Unfortunately, other than, allowing, what I've recommended is allowing, paid time off. Let's make it, because people, especially the first couple months of trying to obtain a vaccine, you took a vaccine appointment whenever you could get one.
Right. And
so what you don't want as an employer is someone to not get vaccinated as soon as possible because they're worried that they're going to miss those 2 hours of work.
Just get the vaccine.
Get the vaccine, right. And frankly, if an employer decides to take advantage of the ARPA extension of the paid sick leave, that is one of the required, you can then get the tax credit for offering the paid sick leave, and they can get their vaccine using that paid sick leave.
Got it.
So that's a change from the last extension of the Paid Sick Leave Act. But in terms of other incentives, I've seen in the news, these crazy, TVs and whatnot, and that I do not recommend. It is a gray area, especially larger employers that offer wellness programs. They're very restricted in what they can offer employees. Smaller employers probably don't have those kinds of benefits anyway, but I would still caution about offering something big ticket because unfortunately, you're going to have some people that, just can't get the vaccine. And if you're going to give everybody an extra week of vacation time to get it, then you are kind of discriminating against someone who can't get it for a disabling condition.
And it's purely discriminatory. That's the reason why you are saying don't provide these incentives, because you get into a discrimination issue.
Potentially. And so, if you want to give someone something, something small.
Right.
But like I said, I think increased accessibility and making it as easy as possible for people to get them.
And how about the literal question of pay them to get the vaccine? Like literally give them $500.
Yeah, see, that would go in with the big ticket items.
Okay.
And there are other, wage and hour issues potentially for non-exempt people when you're giving bonuses like that. So I would steer clear of that.
Okay, good. Well, good to know. Again, if you have other questions, please post them. Otherwise, I'll keep pumping away at questions here. So talk to me about Biden taking office. So, obviously the politics behind this were severe and disruptive in many respects, but here we are.
Here we are.
Biden's president. And I know there's this, it's interesting seeing on social media all the, Biden's tax policies. And as of right now, there are no tax policies. He made a variety of campaign commitments and promises, and raising taxes was one of them. So, where are we in reality today?
Yeah, and from an employment perspective, we definitely are in a more employee-friendly environment federally.
That's already happened.
That's already happened.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. In a typical year, the Department of Labor, for example, will issue maybe a handful of opinion letters. And these opinion letters, although they're not law, it is, hey, this is how the Department of Labor is going to interpret this or this. At the end of the previous administration, we had about 20 of them in the last 2 months. And I'm probably exaggerating a little bit, but it was a huge increase in volume in terms of opinion letters. They tended to be very pro-employer.
Yeah, so Trump's final 2 months in office, they had a whole bunch of opinion letters issued.
Yes.
That were very employer friendly.
Yes.
And were they different substantially in content than the opinions before?
Some of them, yes. And I think what was different are they tackled issues that hadn't been addressed before.
Got
and
it.
They really tried to get out ahead of things and, make their mark, which as an individual who represents primarily employers, that was helpful in a sense because, at least we had some indications of how the Department of Labor is going to interpret, this rule or that rule. And when before we were, you have a myriad of case law and that was all you had to go on. So now a lot of those have been rescinded.
So literally rescinded.
Rescinded.
Okay.
Have
all
totally
of them been
rescinded.
Have all of them been rescinded, or is it a lot?
No, I don't believe all of them have been.
Okay.
Especially in the last couple of weeks of the previous administration, the ones that were issued, I think the majority of those have been rescinded. I could be wrong about that, but a lot of the ones that in the employment world we were hearing a lot about and made more impact, those are now rescinded. Another big change is with the National Labor Relations Board. So a lot of private employers don't think that they need to care about that's just union stuff, and that's a lot of the time true. However, there are parts of the National Labor Relations Act that apply to private employers without a union. And so we had some guidance from the National Labor Relations Board that was very helpful for employee handbooks. That's been rescinded. So we are in a transition time.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, and you started off with you get a handful of these opinion letters per year, I think you said. And so we had a whole bunch issued at the end of last year. We had a whole bunch rescinded this year. Has there been anything new that's additive?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
So far, we're back to where we were a year ago or 2 years ago.
I would say like 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay. So we're not in new territory necessarily.
No, not yet. I think that's coming, and
Yeah.
we've already had indications on certain rules that the Department of Labor is asking for comments, that they are going to be issuing new opinions.
So what are the general topics around that you're getting?
Well, those specifically have to do with like tipping employees. So there are a lot of laws that employers have to follow that are very, very, they go into the nitty gritty details. Right. And sometimes you would think that those would be clearly understood with all of the regulations, but there's gray area. Right. So how are they going to look at the gray area? And that's one of the areas that is going to change, the tipped employees, how you deal with that situation. And it's really interesting because on a federal level, we're becoming, I believe, more pro-employee, which isn't a surprise to everyone. But at the state level, we've finally enacted some new laws that can't just be rescinded. Yeah, right. it's actually a law. And starting in April, I think it's April 13th, our enforcement statutes of the Ohio Civil Rights Code, which is applicable to even smaller employers, very small employers. It has changed finally and kind of bringing us into in line with the federal code, which, there's a 2-year statute of limitations Ohio used to have a 6-year statute of limitations for discrimination claims. We used to have supervisor liability. Now that's kind of taken off the table a bit. It's becoming more employer friendly.
Got it. And are those the two big changes that?
Yeah.
Got it.
The statute of limitations is huge.
That's huge.
Additionally, now in Ohio, an individual could bring a state claim of discrimination directly to court. They will now have to go through the Ohio Civil Rights Commission.
Got it. All right, so we have another question here. Hopefully I can see it. Talk about the FSA changes for 2020 to 2022, the carryovers, et cetera. Are we still waiting for additional guidelines? What does it mean to decriminalize lots of different topics? We'll get to that in a second. So let's answer the first question first.
FSA changes. I am not a benefits attorney, so I don't know. I'm gonna say I don't know that one.
Okay.
But in terms of what it means to decriminalize marijuana, I believe that means, at a federal level, are we going to have any more restrictions on the use of marijuana? Already in Ohio, of course, we do have medical marijuana, which was a huge topic before COVID.
Right, yeah.
But you know what? It's really interesting because it definitely hasn't gone away. And I think that in the next, 5 years, we've already seen other states with cases that have tried to hold employers accountable for not allowing an individual. And I'm not saying while they're at work. It's never okay. Well, so, someone can't come to the office,
You have your vape right there.
Yes. Someone can't come, hi. And so I'm not talking about that situation. I'm talking about, when you do a pre-employment drug screen and somebody is flagged for marijuana, does that automatically mean that they lose their offer? In Ohio, technically that's still okay. I don't think that's going to be.
It's okay to rescind the offer right now, but that's going to change because of.
I think that we're going to see cases brought that challenge that on a disability discrimination situation. And I also think that the trend nationally is increasing legality. And so I think that will ultimately happen too.
Got it. Back to Biden for a second. What other, what big changes do you think we could see that, maybe a year out or 2 years out that we need to think about as employers?
I think I expect something on the minimum wage. So I do think employers need to have that on their radar. Whether or not it's going to be the 15, I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that we're going to have some movement that may impact Ohio employers because it might be over what we already are required to do. And so I do have clients that, especially who have a lot of non-exempt individuals who may be at that threshold. If it goes up very much, they are going to have to increase what they pay. And so, I have a number of clients keeping that on their radar. I also think that the paid leave is going to be more of an issue. And either at the state level, maybe, I don't know, our state, I think has swung very conservative. So we might not see it on the state level, but I do think that's a conversation that's going to be happening.
What type of issue?
Increasing an employer's mandate to provide paid sick leave in certain situations.
And part back to the whole mental health issue as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, to the extent that, I think nationally, one of the challenges that we're going to have coming out of COVID are the people who have been working by themselves for a year and, have been struggling. And I know that that's a concern. Right.
Yeah. It's interesting, in my opinion, so much of this is, legislated via COVID or because of COVID. And so much of this I think about all the time just is the marketplace. Like, I kind of struggle with, the minimum wage from the standpoint of, well, whatever it is, but like the competition's Amazon, that's paying $15, $20, $25 an hour. Like there's a marketplace issue here. Same goes with paid leave. And the big issue, and I think that COVID was a catalyst for this, is the wellness of your employee base, that just, as employers, we're going to have to get better and better and better at investing, and I don't know what that word means when I say investing. I don't know if that means time, energy, money, or all the above in our employees' wellness. And, I come back down to, and, we, the businesses that have the best enterprise values associated with them really do have the best cultures. And as a part of the culture, you have to invest in that employee's wellness, and it's changing. And I turned 53 yesterday, and which is surreal. And it's just what wellness is to me is different than a 43-year-old versus a 33-year-old versus a 23-year-old, and it's complicated. It's just not simple. So there are the employee mandates, legal mandates, but there's also then there's the marketplace. What does the marketplace dictate? So
and obviously, it's different where you're located. I have clients who are in rural Ohio.
Yeah, right. That's right.
They have very different employee wellness issues than somebody who's in central Ohio. But what I also think one of the bigger challenges to a lot of my clients are finding and retaining those employees. And so if I think really the benefits and like you're saying, the wellness, that is going to be a key component to keeping people working.
Agreed. All right. Looks like we have a really, really long question. Yeah. If an employer does not mandate vaccination, is there any risk or liability to the other employees if you permit an employee to come into the office without the vaccination?
Well, so again, right now there is no mandate. There's no state mandate. There's no federal mandate. So I think if you're an employer that is going to mandate the vaccination, you really have to have an imminent threat to your workforce. So my solution to that, again, I probably wouldn't recommend mandating. And I don't think that there's going to be I'm just guessing here. I don't believe that there's liability for not mandating, because like I said, there's no federal mandate, there's no state mandate.
And there's not going to be.
No, not in Ohio.
Yeah.
No. And I don't disagree with that necessarily. And I'm very pro-vaccine personally, but where does that go to other people?
Sure. Right. Yep.
But I think the issue there that you're talking about is how do you make the workplace as safe as possible without vaccine?
Yes.
Like let's say you assume everybody's not vaccinated, and how can we, if it's not practical to segregate or isolate, then you really need to be on top of wearing your facial coverings. You really need to increase the ventilation. There are other things you can do.
Got it. Are face coverings here for good?
No.
Okay.
Please. So many people what I do think you're going to see are people who wear them more on like the airplanes or in crowds. But no, I think everybody in Ohio is kind of chomping at the bit to
drop it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Looks like we have one last question. It's an important one. And that is, who's going to win the NCAA basketball tournament?
Oh my gosh, my bracket. I think one of our attorneys does our tournament for us. I was in last place out of like 70 entries. Okay. So I think Gonzaga.
Okay.
And that's who I picked. Everybody else I picked has lost.
Yeah, right.
Spectacularly.
It's been a weird tournament, particularly considering Ohio State got knocked out in the first round, but Oral Roberts may be the real deal, or actually they had obviously a good run, I should say. Yeah. So, okay. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's been very helpful. And as much as we all want to move forward with life on a post-COVID basis, when we started talking, the reality is it's not going away, and there's legitimate legal considerations that are here for good, and it's a combination, obviously, COVID and administrative change, and also just probably modernization of our workforce in some respects, right?
Yep. And
so, I remember, unfortunately, or whatever, all of us a year ago today remember what it was like, right? And it was scary, and the word I used was, I think we were all frantic and what to do and not to do, and And so now things are not as frantic, and my plea, my ask to all of you is, review your handbook, review your relationship with your employees, and modernize everything in your business to reflect, where we are today and probably where we're going, because it's going to be dynamic for a while, and it's just fairly straightforward things you can do to protect yourself and also improve your relationship with the employees and improve the culture and therefore the enterprise value of your business. So any parting thoughts or anything you want to add to this? Otherwise,
I think what I always tell people is try to be empathetic as much as possible. It's stressful for everyone. We're coming out of this as an employer. Be as empathetic as possible.
Yeah, one of our previous webinars we did, one of our guests said, the CEO role now is Chief Empathy Officer, and I think that's true. And I do believe people are good and have good intentions. Practicing empathy, though, is different than being good and well intended, and it's hard. You have to learn how to do it. I know I've had to learn and try harder to be more and more empathetic, and at least demonstrate that I'm actually am empathetic. So, all right. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Have a good day. Thank you, guys.